The night was dead quiet until everything changed in one terrible second. A train horn screamed through the darkness like a monster waking up. The sound was so loud and sharp that Willy felt it in his bones. His whole body went stiff with fear. The ground under his feet started shaking first just a little, then harder and harder. The metal train tracks began making awful groaning sounds, like they were in pain. Then Willy saw it. A huge freight train was rushing toward them through the night. Its bright headlights cut through the darkness like two angry suns. The train was massive, bigger than anything Willy had ever seen. It looked like a giant metal beast charging forward, ready to destroy everything in its path. But that wasn't the worst part. Right there on the tracks, right in front of the speeding train, someone was tied up. It was a woman, but not like any woman Willy had ever seen before. Her skin was deep purple, like the color of ripe grapes. Her eyes were bright violet, glowing almost like jewels in the dark. Even though she was about to die, she didn't look scared at all. She looked angry, really, really angry. "Get away from here," she yelled at Willy. Her voice was rough and strong, like she had been shouting for hours. "You need to run." Her long black hair was stuck to her face with sweat. When she opened her mouth to yell again, Willy could see her sharp teeth. They looked like fangs. She was pulling against the chains that held her to the tracks, but they were too strong. Willy knew he should listen to her. He should run away and save himself. That would be the smart thing to do. But he couldn't make his legs move. He couldn't just watch someone die, even if that someone was a complete stranger with purple skin and scary teeth. "You can't save me," she snarled at him, still fighting against her chains. It's too late. But Willy wasn't listening anymore. The train was getting closer every second. He could feel the ground shaking harder now. The air was filled with dust and small rocks that were being thrown around by the wind from the speeding train. Willy dropped down to his knees next to the woman. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold onto his plasma cutter as he pulled it from his belt. His heart was beating so fast and so loud that he could barely hear anything else over the sound. The train was getting closer and closer, and its horn kept screaming at them. When Willy looked at the chains around the woman's arms and legs, his stomach dropped. These weren't just regular chains. They were thick and heavy, made of some kind of special metal. Someone had bolted them right into the steel tracks. This wasn't an accident. Someone had put her here on purpose. Someone had wanted her to die, and they had wanted it to be loud and messy. The train blew its horn again. This time it was so close that Willy felt like his ears might burst. The train looked like a wall of metal and noise rushing toward them. The wind from it was so strong that it was hard to breathe. Dust and pieces of metal were flying around them like a tornado. Willy turned on his plasma cutter. The orange light from it lit up the woman's face. Even now, even with death just seconds away, she was still glaring at him with those bright purple eyes. She wasn't giving up, and neither was he. "Hold still," Willy yelled over the noise. "I told you to leave," she yelled back. "You should have run away." "Yeah, well," Willy said, pressing the plasma cutter against the first chain around her wrist. "I'm not the one who's about to get smeared across this whole planet. So how about you stop talking and let me work?" Bright sparks flew everywhere as the plasma blade started cutting into the chain. But something was wrong. The metal was much thicker than Willy had expected. It wasn't just regular steel, it was made of something much stronger. The plasma cutter was hot enough to cut through almost anything, but this metal was fighting back. It was taking way too long to cut through. Willy gritted his teeth together so hard that his jaw hurt. Come on, come on, come on," he whispered to himself. The train was so close now that Willy could see the numbers painted on the front of it. He could see scratches and dents in the metal. The tracks under them were shaking so hard that his whole body was bouncing up and down. His teeth were chattering, and not just from fear. Finally, the first cuff around her wrist snapped open with a loud crack. Willy grabbed her arm and pulled her up into a sitting position. "Move your legs," he shouted. The woman hissed in pain as she tried to move, but she didn't complain. Willy could see that the chains had cut deep into her purple skin. There was dark blood, almost black instead of red, dripping from the wounds. The second chain was around her ankle. It was glowing in the light from his plasma cutter, and Willy could see how tightly it was wrapped around her leg. The metal had bitten deep into her skin. Willy pressed the plasma cutter against this chain too. He watched as the blade burned, even hotter than before, trying to melt through the last layer of metal. Sweat was running down his face and into his eyes, making it hard to see. "Almost there," he yelled. though he wasn't sure if she could hear him over the noise. Then everything happened at once. The train horn blew one more time, so loud and so close that Willy thought his head might explode. The light from the train's headlights was so bright that he couldn't see anything else. The train was right there, just a few seconds away from hitting them. Willy grabbed the woman's wrist and pulled as hard as he could. The chain around her other ankle made a loud snapping sound as it finally broke. With one last desperate push, Willy yanked her free from the tracks just as the huge train screamed past them. The wind from the train was like being hit by a hurricane. Both Willy and the woman were thrown backward through the air. They tumbled across the dirt and rocks, rolling over and over until Willy's back slammed hard into an old, rusty piece of train equipment. Pain shot through his ribs like lightning. A second later, the woman crashed into him too, and they both lay there, gasping for breath and shaking. For a long moment, neither of them could move. The train kept roaring past them, completely unaware that it had almost killed two people. Its bright lights disappeared into the distance, leaving them alone in the dark again. All they could hear was the echo of the train getting farther and farther away. Willy let his head fall back against the cold metal behind him. Holy, he panted, unable to finish the sentence. The woman was lying against him, and Willy could feel that her whole body was tense and rigid. Her breathing was fast and uneven, like she had just run a marathon. Slowly, very slowly, she pushed herself up. Her hands pressed against Willy's chest as she lifted herself. Then, without any warning at all, she grabbed the front of his shirt with both hands and shoved him backward. "What the hell were you thinking?" she snapped. Her violet eyes were blazing with anger, and her face was so close to his that Willy could feel heat coming off her skin. Willy coughed, trying to catch his breath. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said sarcastically. "Was I supposed to let you die instead?" She glared down at him, her eyes narrow and dangerous. "You should have," she said, and her voice was dark and serious. "You don't know what you've just done." Willy stared up at her. His chest was still rising and falling rapidly as he tried to breathe normally again. "Lady," he said, "I just saved you from becoming a piece of abstract art on the side of a train. A thank you would be nice." Her hands curled up into tight fists. Willy could see that they were shaking, but he couldn't tell if it was because she was scared, hurt, or just really angry. "You don't understand," she said quietly, sitting back on her heels. "They were going to come back for me." Willy frowned. "Who?" She turned her head to look toward the horizon. Her expression was unreadable, like she was seeing something that Willy couldn't see. And that's when Willy heard it too, a distant humming sound. It was low and mechanical, and it was getting closer. Willy sat up quickly, his muscles tense and ready. A row of red lights appeared against the night sky, moving fast toward them. "Friends of yours?" Willy asked, though he already knew the answer wouldn't be good. The woman didn't look at him. Her voice was quiet and resigned, like she had given up hope. "They're coming to kill us both." The humming sound of the engines got louder and louder. It was a deep, mechanical growl that Willy could feel vibrating through the ground and into his bones. Willy's grip tightened around his blaster. His pulse was hammering in his throat like a drum. Next to him, the alien woman was still breathing hard from almost dying under the train. She stared toward the horizon where the red lights were getting brighter and closer. "Who are they?" Willy asked, keeping his voice as low as possible. "Dominion hunters," she said, and her violet eyes got even darker. "They want me dead. Now they'll kill you too, just because you helped me." Willy let out a sharp breath. "Well, that's just fantastic," he said sarcastically. She turned to look at him, her gaze sharp and serious. "Can you fight?" Willy almost laughed, but not because anything was funny. "Lady, I wouldn't have lived this long if I couldn't fight." The first hover bike appeared at the top of a nearby hill. It was sleek and black, reflecting the moonlight like a dangerous shadow. The person riding it was wearing a mask and dark clothes. Willy could see them raising a long rifle with a big barrel. Willy grabbed the woman's wrist and yanked her behind a rusty old train car just as a shot rang out. The energy blast sizzled through the air right where Willy's head had been a second before. The metal behind them exploded in a shower of bright sparks. The woman jerked her arm free from Willy's grip. "Don't touch me," she said angrily. "Next time I'll let you take the bullet." Willy shot back. Willy peeked around the edge of the wrecked train car, trying to see what they were up against. The train yard stretched out for miles in every direction. It was full of old, broken train cars and twisted pieces of metal track. There were plenty of places to hide, but not many ways to escape. The woman crouched down beside him, rubbing her wrists where the chains had cut into her skin. The wounds looked painful. "We need to move," she said quietly. "No kidding," Willie replied. Another shot rang out. This one punched right through the steel next to Willie's head, spraying tiny pieces of hot metal everywhere. Willie cursed loudly. "All right, new plan," he said. "We run first, argue later." For once, the woman didn't argue with him. They both took off running, weaving between the rusty train cars as fast as they could. Willie could hear more hover bikes roaring over the hill behind them, kicking up clouds of dust. The hunters were spreading out, trying to surround them. Willie fired a few shots over his shoulder without really aiming. He heard someone scream, but he didn't stop to see if he had actually hit anyone. The woman grabbed his arm and pulled him. "To the left. This way." A bullet hit the ground just inches from Willie's boot, sending up a spray of dirt and rocks. "Anytime you want to explain why you've got an entire death squad chasing after you, I'm all ears," Willie shouted as they jumped over a pile of twisted metal rails. Later, she shouted back. Behind them, Willie could see figures in sleek, dark armor getting off their bikes. They were moving in a formation, like soldiers. A voice crackled through some kind of radio communicator. "Target is mobile. Cut them off." Willie cursed again. He could hear the high-pitched whine of energy weapons charging up. If they got trapped, they were both dead. They ran around the side of a wrecked train car and suddenly stopped. In front of them was a steep drop in old ravine with a floor covered in sharp pieces of scrap metal and broken debris. It looked like it went down at least 20 feet, maybe more. The woman glanced back over her shoulder. The hunters were getting closer, and Willie could see their weapons glowing as they prepared to fire. Willie's stomach twisted with dread. "You're not seriously about to suggest," but before he could finish his sentence, the woman grabbed the front of his shirt with both hands and pushed him hard. Willie felt himself falling through the air. The wind rushed past his ears as he plummeted down into the ravine. He crashed into the bottom hard, rolling through dirt and pieces of broken metal. Every part of his body felt like it was on fire from the impact. A second later, the woman landed beside him, but she was much more graceful about it. She barely made any sound at all when she hit the ground. Willie groaned loudly as he pushed himself up. "I hate you," he said. She didn't bother to respond to that. Above them, one of the hunters reached the edge of the ravine and aimed his weapon down at them. Willie was faster. He fired first, and his blaster's bright energy bolt hit the hunter right in the chest. The hunter fell backward with a strangled cry. The woman grabbed Willie's arm again. "Move." They scrambled over the twisted wreckage at the bottom of the ravine, slipping and sliding between old cargo crates and shattered pieces of trains. Willie gritted his teeth together. "Do you have an exit strategy?" he asked. "Or are we just hoping they get bored and go home?" The woman looked ahead toward what looked like the entrance to a tunnel carved into the earth. "There," she said, pointing. The tunnel opening looked like the mouth of some giant monster. It was completely dark inside, and Willie couldn't see how deep it went. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, maybe decades. "Are you sure about this?" Willie asked. Before the woman could answer, a grenade came flying toward them through the air. Willie tackled her, throwing them both behind a heap of twisted metal just as the explosion shook the entire ravine. Heat seared across Willie's back, and he lifted his head, coughing through the thick dust and smoke. That, he wheezed, was way too close. The woman was already getting back to her feet, her eyes scanning the area around them. "They'll be down here in seconds," she said. Sure enough, Willie could see the hunters sliding down the walls of the ravine, their rifles raised and ready to fire. "No more time," the woman said. She grabbed Willie's wrist and pulled him toward the dark tunnel entrance. Willie didn't resist. They both sprinted into the darkness, leaving the Dominion hunters behind them. The tunnel stretched out in front of them like the gaping mouth of some ancient, sleeping beast. It swallowed up what little light was left from the surface world. There were some old emergency light strips along the walls, but most of them were broken or dying. They gave off just enough flickering light to show that the walls were cracked and covered in rust. The metal that had once been sleek and shiny was now pitted and stained with age. Somewhere in the distance, Willie could hear water dripping. The sound was rhythmic and steady, but in the suffocating silence of the tunnel, it seemed unnervingly loud. Willie leaned against the cold metal wall, pressing one hand against his ribs. His whole body was screaming in protest. He had taken to many hits, run to far, and pushed himself to hard. His pulse was erratic and his breathing was uneven. He had gotten too old for this kind of excitement. But apparently excitement didn't care how old he was. Out of worse scrapes before, but right now he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep moving. The womanzra stood a few feet away, her violet eyes sharp even in the dimness, despite the wounds marring her deep purple skin. She barely seemed winded. There was a tension in her stance, though her muscles coiled, her shoulders rigid like a predator, not yet convinced the hunt was over. We should keep moving, she sighed, voice low. Willie exhaled, tilting his head back against the metal. Yeah, give me second. Zira's gaze flicked to his side, where blood had soaked through his shirt. You're injured? He forced a grin, though it came out more like a grimace. Notice that, did you? Instead of answering, she crouched beside him, her movements smooth and deliberate. He tensed, expecting some sharp remark or another warning about how he should have left her. Instead, she reached for the hem of his shirt. Wiley's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Buy me dinner first, she glared at him, unimpressed. Stop talking. With a quick yank, she lifted his shirt, exposing the wound. Willie hissed, Sadus. The cold air hit raw, bruised flesh. A deep gash stretched across his ribs, the skin torn and swollen from the impact of the fall. He had taken worse before, sir, but that didn't mean this one didn't hurt like hell. Zara studied the wound with unreadable eyes. Then, without warning, she reached into the small satchel strapped to her waist and pulled out a slim vial filled with shimmering silver liquid. Willie eyed it wearily. That's not going to turn me into a space lizard or something, is it? She ignored the question. Instead, she flicked the cap off and did fingers into the thick substance. Then, before he cold-reeked, she pressed them against his wound. Fire, a sharp, searing burn lanced through his nerves, so sudden and intense that his vision blurred. He sucked in a breath, every muscle in his body locking up. He said, Stay still, Zara ordered. Willie clenched his jaw, forcing himself not to thrash as the sensation burned through him like molten metal. It felt like something was crawling under his skin, fusing the torn tissue back together, knitting muscle and sealing ruptured veins. Then, just as fast as it had started, the pain dulled. A cool numbness spread through him, his ragged breathing evening out. He exhaled sharply. That was unpleasant. Zira wiped the excess liquid off her fingers. Andrew capped the violet will speed healing. Willie gingerly pressed a hand to his side. The wound was still tender, but already the worst of the pain had faded. You always carry magic space goo, or am I just lucky? Zara's gaze flicked. Haisu lucky, he smirked. That's what I like to hear. She didn't respond. Instead, she shifted back, putting space between them. That was the moment Willie realized something strange. Despite how easily she had touched him to treat his wound, there was something hesitant about the way she moved now, as if she had only done it out of necessity. And now that the moment had passed, she wanted no part of physical contact. That told him more about her than anything else. Silence stretched between them. The distant drip of water echoed in the empty tunnel. Willie let his head rest against the wall, watching her out of the corner of his eye. You went too. Tell me why your own people left you to die, he asked eventually. Shestafan just slightly. For a long moment she said nothing, then finally she murmured, I was betrayed. Her voice was flat, controlled, but Willie caught the edge of something buried beneath it. Yeah, I figured that much, he said, shifting to get more comfortable. Care to elaborate? She hesitated, then almost reluctantly she spoke. I was part of the Dominion, she said, a soldier. I followed orders, I did what was expected of me. Something in the way, she said. It made Willie frown. Until you didn't. Her jaw tightened. Until I didn't. She looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers as if testing their strength. They wanted me to be so Mathinji refused to become. Well, he didn't push. He had seen enough in his life to recognize that kind of weight, the kind of burden that came with surviving something you weren't supposed to. Instead, he exhaled. Yeah, I know how that feels. She glanced at him, curiosity flickering behind her guarded expression. Do you? He gave her a small humorless more than I'd like. For a long time neither of them spoke, then something shifted. Zara moved, not much, just enough that the space between them shrank. Not now to touch, not quite, but closer. Will he let the moment sit? He didn't rush it. Then without thinking he reached over and covered her hand with his herbity tens. For a second he thought she'd pull away, but she didn't. She stayed still, her fingers rigid beneath his. Then slowly, so slowly he almost didn't notice her fingers curled slightly, just enough to acknowledge the touch. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something, and for now that was enough. Fire burned low, embers crackling softly as they curled into the damp air of the abandoned tunnel. The flickering light carved shadows across the rusted walls, outlining the jagged edges of collapsed beams and forgotten machinery. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Willie leaned back against the cold metal, stretching his aching legs out in front of him. His body was battered, his ribs sore, but the healing serum had worked at least enough to keep him from keeling over. The exhaustion in his limbs warned him he should sleep, but his mind was too aware of the woman sitting just across from him, her violet eyes reflecting the firelight. Zara, she hadn't spoken much since saturating his wound. She sat near the fire, her long black hair cascading over her shoulder, methodically checking the edge of a blade she had pulled from her belt. The sharp edge gleamed under the dim light. Her posture was controlled, shoulders tense, as if she were bracing for something unseen. Willie sighed. You always this quiet? Zier didn't look up. You always this talkative? He smirked, rubbing his temple. Only when I'm avoiding the fact that my body feels like it got run over by a star freighter. A flicker of something, amusement maybe, crossed her face, but it was gone too fast to be sure. Willie exhaled. So you want to tell me what your deal is? Her grip on the blade tightened slightly. He caught that. I mean, he continued more carefully, now I get the whole wanted dead by your own people thing, but what I don't get is why you were on those tracks in the first place. She didn't answer right away. The fire popped, sending tiny sparks into the stale air. Then quietly, she said it was a message. Willie frowned. For who? Finally, she looked up. For me. His brows fed. That's a hell of a way to send a message. Zier set the blade down, her fingers flexed before curling into fists. They wanted me to understand that I was no longer one of them. Not worth atrial, not worth execution, just discarded. Willie studied her. He had seen that look before, the kind of emptiness that came after betrayal so deep it left a scare. After a moment, he shook his head. Idiots. Zara blinked. What? They should have killed you, he said, simply because leaving you alive. That was their biggest mistake. Something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe. Then unexpectedly, she smirked. Not the sharp, bitter kind she had given him before. This was softer, more thoughtful. Almost like she was seeing him differently. For the first time, Willie grinned. There it is. I was starting to think you didn't know how to smile. Zier rolled her eyes. I should have left you back in that ravine. Yeah, but then who would you have to argue with? She exhaled, shaking her head. But there was no real irritation in it. Silence stretched between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. After a moment, Willie shifted, wincing slightly as he reached for the edge of his shirt. He could still feel the dull ache from where Thedamini and Hunter had gotten a lucky shot earlier. Zara noticed. Before he could protest, she was already moving, closing the small space between them. Let me see, she murmured. I'm fine. She gave him a pointed look. Willie sighed. You're real pushy. You know that? Zara didn't respond. Instead, she reached forward and pushed his shirt up, her fingers brushing against his bare skin. Willie froze. Her tuck was warm, firm, but not rough. He could feel the heat of her palm as she examined the bruising, her fingertips ghosting over his ribs with surprising care. His breath hitched just slight. Lizer noticed. She glanced up at him, her violet eyes locked onto his. Neither of them moved. The air between them shifted, charged with something neither of them acknowledged, but both of them felt. Her fingers didn't move away. Will, he swallowed this. The part where you break another one of my bones. Zara's lips twitched just barely. Then instead of pulling away, she did something he did not expect. She traced a slow, deliberate path down his side. Will's heart slammed against his ribs. It wasn't a calculated touch. It wasn't a test. It was instinctive. And that was what made it dangerous. Shara seemed to realize it at the same moment he did. Her fingers stilled, but she didn't pull away. Willie exhaled, forcing himself to speak. Sue, you want to tell me what that was? Zara said nothing. Then, so quietly Huberly heard it, she murmured, you shouldn't want this. Will's jaw tensed. Too late. Zara's breathing was steady, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her lips parted slightly, like she was caught between running and staying. She chose stay. And then, just like that, she kissed him. It wasn't careful. It wasn't slow. It was desperate. Zara's hands curled into his shirt, pulling him forward as her lips crashed against his. She tasted like fire and seething raw, something untamed. Willie groaned against her mouth, his hands finding her waist, his grip firm but reverent. He felt the press off her body against his, the way she moved As if this was something she had Denny Dursel for too long, she kissed him deeper, her fingers sliding into his hair, gripping tight, like she needed to hold on to something real. Willie responded in kind, his hands traveling up her back, feeling that tension coiled beneath her skin. He let himself sink into it, let himself forget for a moment that the universe outside of this moment even existed. Then Zara pulled Deb away, breathing ragged, lips slightly swollen. She looked at him with something close to fear, not fear of him, fear of herself. Willie stared at her, his chest rising and falling. "I can't," she said abruptly, then before he could stop her, she stood. She turned away, retreating into the darkness off the tunnel, her body stiff, her hands clenched in two fists. Willie exhaled, running a hand down his face. He had just gotten a taste of something electric, something real, something that could burn him alive. And from the ways had fled, he wasn't the only one. The tunnel trembled, a deep, mechanical hum rippled through the ground, growing louder, a predator's growl. Before the strike, Willie tightened his grip on his blaster. His body was still aching, but adrenaline burned through his veins, forcing him into sharp focus. He didn't need Zara to tell him. The Dominion had found them. Across from him, Zara stood rigid, her shoulders squared, her violet eyes locked on the distant glow of approaching lights. Whatever had passed between them moments ago, whatever had ignited in that kiss, was shoved aside, buried beneath the weight of survival. No more room for hesitation. The first explosion rocked the tunnel, a controlled blast, not meant to kill, but to cut off tire escape. Willie staggered, but caught himself against the wall as dust and debris rained down. A silhouette emerged from the thick smoke, not just another faceless Dominion soldier, tall, broad, and cased in gleaming black armor with silver inlays. The way he carried himself, calm, effortless, told Willie everything he needed to know. This wasn't just some grunt. This was someone who believed himself untouchable. As the smoke thinned, the man's features sharpened in the dim emergency lights. Golden eyes, strong jaw, a thin scar tracing down his temple. He looked just like Zara. Willie's pulse quickened. Didn't have to ask. The resemblance was too sharp. The tension in Zara's posture too rigid. Still, he needed to hear it. He glanced at her. "Friend of yours?" Zara didn't blink, her voice, when it came, was like steel. "Wah, brother." Two muttered a curse. "Well, that complicates things." Reek stepped forward, slow and deliberate, exuding the kind of control that came from knowing he was the most dangerous man in the room. His eyes flicked to Willie, first casual, uninterested, then back to Zara. "H. Road, traitor." Zara didn't react, but Willie felt the air shift as if the temperature had dropped. Wright clasped his hands behind his back, tilting his head slightly. "I thought you would have died with more dignity." He glanced at Willie again, lips curling in distaste. "Instead, you're hiding behind a human." Willie let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "Man, you Dominion types really love hearing yourselves talk, huh?" Ray ignored him. "I'll give you one chance, Zara," he continued, his voice smooth, almost gentle. "Come with me now, and I will make it painless." Zara didn't answer immediately. Willie's gut twisted. He had never seen her hesitate before, not like this. She wasn't afraid, she was calculating. Shek knew right too well, knew how he fought, knew exactly what he was capable of, and she wasn't sure she could win. Willie couldn't let that doubt fester here. "I'm going to have to veto that plan," he said, stepping slightly in front of Zara, raising his blaster. "Not in the mood to let a jackass in fancy armor execute my partner." Rhea shelled through his nose. "This doesn't concern you." Human Yavali smirked. "See, I feel like it does, since you're pointing a kill order at the only person keeping me from getting me ass vaporized." Rick gave him an unreadable look before his hand drifted to his belt, pulled out a sleek circular device. A small sharp beep filled the air. Pain, a wave of agony, slammed into Wiley's nervous system, searing through every nerve like fire. His legs gave out. His blaster fell from his grip as his muscles spasmed, body convulsing under an invisible current. He barely registered Redzer shouting his name. The pain stopped. Willie gasped, vision swimming as he collapsed to his hands and knees. His limbs still twitched, his heart hammering in erratic beats. Rake crouched beside him, tapping the device against his knee. "You humans are so fragile." Willie, still shaking, managed to lift his head with effort. Through gritted teeth he muttered, "Yeah, well, your breath sucks." Rai chuckled. "I'll enjoy watching you die." A blur off motion, Zara lunged. Her blade struck like lightning, aimed directly for Ray. Throatrite caught her wrist mid-strike, twisting it violently. The sound of bone grinding against bone made Willy wince, but Zir didn't flinch. She spun, using the momentum to drive a kick toward his ribs. Reich deflected it effortlessly, stepping back as if he had expected it. Zira attacked again, faster this time, every move calculated, every strike relentless, but Reich was just as fast. He sidestepped, countered, and dodged, his motions fluid, tauntingly controlled, still predictable, Reich said, smirking as he blocked another blow. No wonder the abandon you. Zara's movements faltered for half a second. That was all Rick needed. He drove a fist into her stomach hard. Zir gasped, staggering back. But ere she could recover, he grabbed her by the throat and slammed her against the tunnel wall. Wiley's heart stopped. Rake leaned and closed, his voice quiet. You hesitated. Zert clawed at his grip, but he was stronger, pinning her effortlessly. Will's vision snapped into focus. No hesitation, no second guessing. He grabbed the nearest thing, his fallen blaster was too far, so he snatched up a rusted pipe from the ground and swung. The impact landed against Reich's skull with a sickening crack. Reich grunted in pain, releasing Zar as he staggered back. Shouldn't waste a second. Zara exploded forward, slashing deep across his arm. Blood sprayed. Rake stumbled, gripping the wound. His golden eyes flickered with something new, surprise. Willy grabbed Zero's wrist when he'd to go. Now more Dominion soldiers flooded into the tunnel, weapons raised. Reich, still gripping his bleeding arm, chuckled darkly. You can't run forever. Zara's breath was uneven, her fingers still clenched around her blade. She didn't move, didn't turn to run. For a terrifying second, Willy thought she was going to stay and fight, that she was going to let herself die here. He yanked at her arm hard. Zara, he snapped, his voice raw. Move. Her gaze locked onto his. Then finally she turned and ran with him. Blaster fire streaked past them. Thetnal shook as they sprinted, dodging falling debris, the Dominion's shouts echoing behind them. Willy didn't look back, didn't slow down, but his mind kept replaying one moment Zara had hesitated, not because she was afraid, because for a single breath she had been willing to let him go, and that terrified him more than anything. They ran until the world blurred. Blaster fire rained down, streaks of blue and red, searing the air around them. Each shot sizzled against rusted metal, illuminating the ruined tunnel. In violent flashes, the Dominion soldiers were relentless, closing the distanza with military precision. Wiley's lungs burned, his ribs arced from where Riachedvis had nearly fried his nervous system. His legs threatened to buckle, but he forced himself forward, dragging Zara with him. She had hesitated back there. He still couldn't shake the image from his mind, her standing in the fight longer than she should have, as if she wanted to stay, as if she had been willing to let them go. Not happening. Up ahead, the tunnel widened into a cavernous chamber. Once an underground transport hub, freight haulers sat abandoned, their hulking frames covered in decades of dust and decay. Rusted catwalks stretched above, leading to vents barely big enough to squeeze through a dead end. Tell me you have a plan, Willy panted, pulling Zareb in the cover of a corroded shipping container. Zara wiped blood from her lip, her breath steady despite the chase. We make our stand, Willy groaned. Yeah, I was afraid you'd say that. A blaster bolt struck the crate, sending molten shrapnel flying. Willy ducked, cursing under his breath. Any chance we can rethink that whole fight to the death angle? Zara scanned the chamber, her sharp eyes locked onto a cargo elevator on the far side, its platform barely hanging on ancient wires frayed from age. Above it, a vent shaft led to open ground. She pointed there. Willy followed her gaze. You do see the drop under that thing, right? We slip where paced. Zara looked at him. Then don't slip. He let out a short laugh. Oh, great advice. Thanks. More blaster fire cut him off. The Dominion had reached the entrance, their armored forms spilling into the space like a black tide. At the front stood Reich, golden eyes gleaming through the smoke. Enough, Reich called out, his voice sharp, commanding. His soldiers didn't fire. They waited. There is nowhere left to run, sir. Zara stepped out from cover, blade still clutched in her grip. Then I want, Willy swore under his breath, but followed her, blasting raised. Rick studied them. The cut on his arm from their last fight still bled, staining his sleek armor, but he didn't seem to care. His eyes flicked to Willy. Tell me, human, how does it feel to die for someone who will never be yours? The words hit harder than they should have. Willy kept his gun steady, forcing a grin. Pretty sure you've got that backwards, pal. I'm not the one bleeding. Rake smirked. Not yet. Then he moved fast. Too fast. Zara met him head on, their blades clashing in a shower of sparks. She struck high, aiming for his neck, but he blocked. Effortlessly twisting her wrist and sending her staggering back, Willie fired. But Rake anticipated it. Using Zara as a shield, Willie hesitated a fraction of a second, just enough time for Rake to close the gap. A brutal punch slammed into Willie's ribs. He gasped, doubling over. Zareen lunged again, blade flashing, forcing Rake to disengage. She pressed the attack, each strike faster, more precise, but Rake was stronger. He caught her next blow mid-swing and drove a knee into her stomach, sending her to the ground. Willie fired again. This time he didn't hesitate. The shot clipped Rake's shoulder. Not enough to kill, but enough to piss him off. Rake turned toward Willie, eyes burning. Zer, still on the ground, looked at Willie, something frantic in her expression. Run didn't. Instead, he charged. Rake was faster. He caught Willie by the throat, lifted him off the ground, and slammed him against the rusted hull of an old hauler. Pain exploded through Will's back, gasped, struggling. But Rake's grip was unbreakable. You're nothing, Riek murmured, tightening his hold. You should have stayed up out of this. Will's vision blurred. Black spots danced in his eyes, but then Zara screamed. Not a sound of pain, a sound of rage. Rake barely had time to turn before she was on him. She didn't use her blade. She tackled him, driving him back with sheer force, her hands clawing at his armor, her strength unnatural. Her eyes glowed. Willie hit the ground, sucking in air as he watched, stunned. Rags struggled, actually struggled for the first time. He looked shocked. You don't get to take him, Zara snarled. Then with a roar, she drove her elbow into Rake's chest, denting his armor. Rake gasped. Zara struck again and again. Willie had never seen her like this. She was furious. She was vengeance. Rake stumbled back cuffing, disoriented. His soldiers hesitated. They had never seen him lose before. Zara grabbed Willie's wrist and pulled him up. No hesitation this time. They ran. Rake recovered fast. Stop them. Blaster fire filled the air. Zir and Willie dived onto the cargo elevator. Zir smashed the controls with the hilt of her blade, overloading the circuits. The platform jerked, worked upward with a violent shudder. He ascended fast, but not fast enough. Rick lunged, jumping onto the elevator with them. Willie swung his blaster like a club, catching Rake across the jaw. The Dominion commander reeled, but barely. Zara shoved Willie behind her. Then she did something unexpected. She threw her weapon away. Rake frowned. What are you? Zir tackled him. She forced him to the edge of the elevator, feet skidding against metal. Reek realized too late. Zara let go, and Rake fell. Willie barely had time to process before the elevator slammed into its final stop. The impact sent them both sprawling into a ruined rooftop under an open sky. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, breathing heavily, Willie turned to Zara. That was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Zara, flat on her back, let out a breathless laugh. She turned her head toward him. Their eyes met. Neither of them spoke. Then, before Willie could think, she grabbed his collar and kissed him. This time it was a desperate. It was slow, deliberate. Willie melted into it, fingers sliding into her hair, holding her like he might lose her again. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. I thought I lost you, she murmured. Willie smirked. You almost did. She exhaled, eyes closing. No more running? He nodded. No more running. They lay there, catching their breath under the stars together. The end.